Okay, welcome everybody. This is section 1.3, the Co-Req. I'm looking at our timeline. We have to do 1.3, 1.4 today. So we're going to do two sections today. It should take about as long as it did yesterday, right before 8 o'clock, hopefully. So we're going to do those two sections today. Then review for test 2 tomorrow, and tomorrow's Wednesday. Then I'm going to probably do on Thursday the final two sections. If I can do yes, I can do those on Thursday. If not, I'll do one of them tomorrow after the test review. But I'd like to just focus on the test review tomorrow. Then Thursday, there's two sections we need to finish. Let's go back to the module. Week 3, if you look, there's our test, and it is due Sunday. So the test is in the homework section. This is the last Co-Req test. It's in the homework section. The password is going to be test 2. If it's not that already, I'm going to make it test 2. So I'm putting the password here. Let's see how many people email me and ask me what's the password. Password for test. Password is test 2. So lowercase test 2. So test 2 is in My Labs Plus. It's due Sunday, and the password is test 2. All lowercase, no spaces. All right, and then after that, I mean, not after that, Thursday, we're actually going to cover, finally, the college algebra material, R.4, the college algebra material, 1.1 and R7, R6, rational exponents, and so on and so on. So we start right after tomorrow. We start with the actual college algebra material and the stuff where the grade really counts big. All right, so I'm in the workbook. We're on section 1.3. Unfortunately, let's put the square root of negative 16 on my calculator. So I want to put that on my calculator. The square root of negative 16. Square root of negative 16, and if you hit enter, it says error. You cannot take the square root of a negative number. You can take the third root, the fifth root. If it's an odd root, third root, fifth root, seventh root, you can. But square root, fourth root, even root, second root, which is a square root, fourth root, sixth root, you can't take the square root because it gives you an error. However, there's a rule that it says write the number as a product of a real number and I. So if they tell you about this real number and I is called an imaginary number. So we have to teach this in college algebra. In reality, nobody uses this unless you're like a really top scientist. You're an engineer. Let's say if you're an engineer, people use this I, but we have to learn it. It's part of the Texas curriculum for college algebra. So this I exists, and the only thing you need to remember is you only deal with I's when they tell you you're dealing with imaginary numbers, real and I. So when they say you're going to have an I in the answer, that you're dealing with imaginary numbers. The only thing you need to know is I equals the square root of -1. Also, you need to know that I square, I think you need to know this, we'll see, equals -1. So let's remember these two. I think that's right. So the square root of -16 changes to the square root of -1 times the square root of 16. Remember how we did yesterday? We could separate these square roots. You could squeeze them together and break them apart with a multiplication. So -16 is -1 times 16. So I just broke it apart. The square root of 16, you can actually put that in your calculator, equals 4. And the square root of -1 from right here equals I. So normally you put the number first. So the answer to number 1 is 4I. Okay. In other words, what's the square root of -16? If you put it in a calculator, you get an error. However, if they say we want the answer in imaginary form with an I, all square roots of -1 change to I. So there's a negative in front of the square root. Once again, it's -9. So change it to -1 times 9. So I'm going to change this again, negative square root of -1 times the square root of 9. Just going to break it apart. We know this equals I. And the square root of 9, if you're not sure about that, put it in your calculator, equals 3. And there's a negative in front. So the final answer is -3I. You put the number in front of the letter always. Ooh. Has anybody seen I's before, like in high school or in any other math class you've taken? Called imaginary numbers. Just wondering if anybody's seen them before. I had them in high school, I remember. Yeah, almost. It was a long time ago, wasn't it? Back in the day, I remember I told my father, yeah, I'm in algebra. We have algebra. He goes, oh no, you're in that algebra, that new math. You're on your own, kid. I can't do that new math. Algebra has been around for hundreds and hundreds of years. There's nothing new about it. It's kind of funny. All right, put the square root of 29 in your calculator. Let's see. I'm going to put that in my calculator. Wait, I mean, let's do it this way first. I'm going to separate it. We know this is I. But what's the square root of 29? I know what it is. I just want to know if you know what it is. It equals the square root of 29. Nothing pops out. So it stays like that. In other words, my pen. Give me a second. This was the square root of -1 times square root of 29. This is I times the square root of 29. I would just leave it like this, I square root of 29. Normally you put the I after, but sometimes it's confusing because some people think the I is in the square root, but it's not. So either way is fine. Try it in the homework. I think that's the better picture where you have I in front, because some people will accidentally put it inside the square root, and that's wrong. All right, so number 4. square root of -1 times the square root of 176. Well, let's put the square root of 176 in our calculator. So there's a lot of calculator stuff here. Square root of 176 on my calculator. And you're going to see it's going to turn into something. 4 square root 11 turns into 4 square root 11. Uh-oh, I paused something by accident. I don't know what I did. Where did I pause it? I hit pause. Your screen sharing is paused. Where do I stop that? Let me do this. Stop sharing and go back. I'm still learning Zoom. There. So square root of 176 is square root of -1 times the square root of 176. And this is I. And we already put the square root of 176 in our calculator, and we got 4 square root of 11. So once again, I'm going to write it like this. For I on the outside, square root 11 on the inside. So it's always the number in front of the letter. So I like it written like this best. I mean, in reality, you could. It's not wrong if you wrote it like this. It's just people get confused on whether the i's in the square root or not. It's not in the square root. I would just write it like this.
So then on number 1 and 2, should we have put the 4 in front, like number 2 and 1, since we just wrote it out regularly? We didn't put it under the square root.
Let me see. Number 4?
No, like number 1 and 2, we didn't put it like in the square root, how we're doing it now.
Oh, because it simplifies. The square root is hang on. The square root of 16. This is the square root of -1 times the square root of 16. The square root of 16 is 4. There's no, do you see, there's no square root anymore. So this is just 4i.
Okay.
The number comes in front of the letter. There's no square root anymore. But the one we just did, 176, square root of 176, square root of -1 times square root of 176. This is I. Square root of 176 is 4 square root of 11. So the I always comes after the number on the outside, not on the number inside. There's a radical that's left over that everything couldn't come out of this one, where number 1 it could.
Okay, thank you.
Does that make sense? Yeah. And this one, so is square root of -1 times the square root of 125. Put the square root of 125 in your calculator. You should get 5 square root of 5. And so the answer is 5i square root of 5. The goal when you simplify radicals is get as much stuff out. I mean, let me show you how to do. Let me just show you the long way in number 4. Square root of -1 times the square root of 176. Well, 176 is 16 times 11. We know this is I. So 176 is 16 times 11. The square root of 16 times the square root of 11. Well, the square root of 16 is 4. So we're left with a 4 on the outside and an I, and a square root of 11 on the inside. Do you see? That's the calculator's doing all the work for us, but our goal is to get as much stuff out of the square root as possible. Square root of 16 equals 4. This was the I part, and then we had the square root of 11 left over. So the calculator does it all for us, but we cannot type in a negative or the calculator won't do it. That's why I changed this negative on the inside. I changed that to I right away. Does that help everybody? Is that okay? Everybody okay with that? Just want to make sure we're okay. All right, so this is really similar to what we just did, except there's more stuff. Okay, so this is how I want you to do these problems because I really want you to use the calculator on these. Look at the square root of negative 28. Well, just look at that part for now. This is the same thing as the square root of negative 1 times the square root of 28. We know this equals I. So there's going to be an I in front of the square root. I square root of 28, okay? So on your calculator, you have to be able to do this whole thing. So on my calculator, I'm going to put this in my calculator exactly as I see it. I know later on I'm going to end up putting an I in front of this because that's where that negative comes from. So we're going to put 2 minus the square root of 28 divided by 2 in our calculator. 2 minus the square root of 28 divided by 2. So on my calculator, you got to first type in a fraction and type in 2 minus the square root of 28 divided by 2. Do you see? I'm not dealing with the I want my calculator. It won't, if there's a negative inside that radical in the square root, it won't do any math for us. So this is the problem. When I hit enter, it changes to a negative square root of 7 plus 1. And we know the I goes in front of the square root. So the answer to this, we already said, I like square root. This was the answer on my calculator. But this negative says put the I in front of the square root. So by the way, normally, this is correct, but normally you put the 1 plus the, 1 minus I square root of 7. Either one of these is right. The negative I square root of 7 plus 1 or 1 minus. Do you see? Just as long as this part is minus and this part is positive. The 1 is positive. The other stuff is negative. But this is how your calculator has you put it in, so I'm going to do it that way. That's the answer to this problem. If you go to the back of the book, maybe I think 1 might be in front. I'm going to go look at the answers really quick. If I can.
I'm getting the error on my calculator.
Don't put the negative in there.
I put the 2 minus square root of 28.
Wait. Oh, no. Wait. Let me get up there. Give me a second. Where are we? 2 minus. Oh, because you didn't use the minus button. You used the negative button.
Oh yeah, you're right.
I know exactly what you did. And by the way, when you did that, if you hit enter, that negative is probably highlighted, right? It says error. Watch, I'm gonna show you on my calculator 2 minus the square root of 28 over 2. Watch this. It helps to, I'm gonna do the fraction first, 2, and then I'm gonna do negative. I'm gonna make your mistake, 2 negative square root of 28 and then over 2. So watch what happens. It says error, but when I hit, I think if I hit enter again, no, I have to hit the arrow, I think. Arrow or clear? Clear. Do you see how it's highlighting the negative? That means that's the error.
Okay.
So, oh, I used the wrong bit. I have to use the subtraction button. Now when you hit enter, it does it for you. I changed it to subtraction. Okay. So if you type that in and hit clear, it highlights where the error is. All right, let's go to number 7. So I'm going to give you guys a second to try this one, see if you can use everything I've done so far. And I'm going to try it on my calculator myself. And let's see if you get the same thing I do. If anybody wants to type it in the chat box. Oh, I erased mine. Why did I erase it? Am I singing Christmas songs? Okay, did you get 2i square root of 3 plus 3? So you know this is an I, so I'm putting just this into my calculator. When you put that in your calculator says this. You got to remember to put the I in front of this radical. Did everybody get this? Good, good.
So in the back of the book for number 6, it did have the 1 minus I and then the square root of 7. And then for this one, for number 7, it actually has 3 plus the 2i and square root of 3.
Yeah, yeah, that's fine. That's what I mentioned earlier. Normally, you know, for this one, you're saying this is what the answer looks like, right, in the back of the book.
Correct. Yeah. So then,
Yeah.
whenever we type it, whichever way when we're doing our homework or the test, it's going to be fine.
It'll be correct. Yes.
Okay.
Just know that the 3 is positive and the 2i, there's a positive in front of it. You know, the other problem up here that, if I can get to it. The other problem up here had a negative. So you had to know, do you see the 2 there? This is 4 times 7. This was 2 minus I with a 4 square root of 7 over 2, right? So that cancels. So you get 1 minus 2I square root of 7. This was the answer. But in the back of the book, I mean, if you type it in the homework, that's going to be correct. But in the back of the book, they always have the I part first, the negative 2I square root of 2. Do you see the I has the negative? This 1 is positive, so then you put plus 1. So this is the way the back of the answer key is. And this is the way the answers are normally written and multiple choice if you take a multiple choice test. But you won't take one for this test. Test 3, 4, and 5 are multiple choice when we get to the actual algebra. So it doesn't matter which way you type it in. Either way is correct. They'll mark it correct in the homework both ways. Just as long as the I is in front of that square root and the signs are correct. All right, try number 9. We're going to just go to number 9. Put number 9 into your calculator. Number, that's an I. -4 minus the square root of 108, all divided by 2. And if you're going to write it the other way, the -2 goes in front, minus 3i square root of 3. So either way is fine. This is the way it shows in the back of the book. And this is the way your calculator shows it. Either way is fine. Maybe I should put workbook answer. Any other questions on these? Seems pretty easy. Is that it? That was 1.3? Really? That seemed too easy for me. It takes practice just being able to put that into your calculator. And